Welcome to La Trobe University in Melbourne. My name is Jan Libich, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Kerry Howells from the University of Tasmania. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you.
Kerry is not only a really inspirational educator and someone who's been a very established researcher, but she's also a practitioner. You've given many seminars and workshops to a number of institutions about effective teaching and learning. So we're very happy to have you. Please make us feel welcome. I would also like to introduce our audience. It's a mixture of my students, tutors, as well as some of my colleagues. So thank you very much, guys, for coming. So we're here today to talk about what we can do to actually improve the learning and teaching experience of both the students and the staff. And I think there's no one better to talk about this than Kerry. I actually lost count of all these awards that you've received in the last few years. At least 8 since you joined University of Tasmania in 2006, I think, or something like that. So, I mean, what is it that makes people give you awards? What is it about your teaching? What is it that you do in classroom that has such an impact?
Yes, it's a very big question, and I'm hoping that sort of unfolded during our interview. But just in short, I think one of the things that I do is that I really take note of Parker J. Palmer's philosophy, which is that he's written a wonderful book called The Courage to Teach, and he believes that teaching cannot be reduced to technique, and teaching is all about the identity and integrity of the teacher. And I don't really believe I mean, I think you have to have the technique of teaching really down pat, and make that your craft, but also one needs to look at the inner dimension of what's going on. And so if my students aren't learning, the first point I go to be able to sort of reflect on that is not the students but myself. And so I see teaching as much about self-development as I do about development of techniques and strategies and things like that.
I think that the notion that if we are kind of more grateful for what we receive has a positive impact on, on our life and our relationships. That's I think there's actually some scientific evidence that your expectations matter. But you're basically saying that it's also a powerful educational tool.
Yes.
That both the students and the teachers, if they're kind of more grateful for the whole experience, they basically it leads to much better learning outcome for the students.
Yeah.
I think that's a relatively that struck me as a very novel thing in your book. So it really made me kind of think more carefully about what I was bringing to the lectures and how I was thinking of the teacher-student relationship. There's some amazing stories in your book. I always think of Joseph, the refugee, in this respect. Can you tell that story?
That was a really, really moving experience for me. Just listen, I was at a gathering, and it was a gathering where refugees were asked. In Tasmania, were invited to come and tell some of their stories. And Joseph just got up, and he was this sort of very calm, beautiful man, and he talked about having been in refugee camps since he was 4 years old, and he'd experienced a massive genocide in Rwanda, and watched his whole family be obliterated. And in the camp there were a lot of really depressed refugees, and they'd gone from refugee camp to refugee camp, and one day they just decided that they couldn't keep going in this really depressed state, so they decided to start looking at the gifts that they thought that they could give to their community and start sharing them. So they started to share some of the things that they felt that they could give to the community. And when they started to do this, they started to appreciate each other and a lot more, and they started to be a lot more optimistic and happy. And then they started to actually share these gifts. And then they decided that they had enough gifts amongst them to start a school. So that in the refugee camp, that kind of sharing of what I can give in the end ended up being part of the education they were going to give to their children, because they realised that one person can teach sewing and another person can teach gardening and another person can teach something else. So instead of being in this kind of really depressed state of what has happened to me, they started to turn it around to what I can give to my community, and that's when they started to really, their whole well-being started to improve and the well-being of the community started to improve.
And then he basically concluded by this really powerful line.
Yeah.
What did he
That's
say?
right.
My suffering is my treasure, I think.
My suffering is my greatest treasure, yes.
I just thought it was so powerful, because it makes you pause and think, you're kind of constantly complaining about, not having this and about that, and then you see someone whose life has been so terrible, and they could still, reflect on it and see the bright side of it and see how much it helped them to get whatever, wherever they got. I think it's really, we kind of have to remind ourselves that this is what we, need to do.
And I noticed that, and the audience probably here notices, and you probably do, Jan, too, that we do get a certain percentage of our students who are really awake in our classes, and often the story behind their awakeness is some kind of story of misfortune, or a story of not having what they now have. And because they now have something that they never thought they would have, like the refugees in some of my classes are the most awake. And so are the many of the mature age students who have really wanted and ached to get an education for many years, and they've been at home with their kids, or they've been doing some work that's been a bit meaningless, and now they can start to do what they really want to do. And there's, like, every moment is a real treasure for them, like Joseph was saying. And that kind of appreciation, you can see it and just transfer take the theory from that. Like, what is it about them that's so awake that isn't in these other students? And it is these stories of, I didn't have and now I do, and so I'm really valuing my education. And that quality of awakeness comes from that gratitude, which is, it's sort of like quite evident, really.
But let me just, in this gratitude work, it seems it kind of overlaps with this positive thinking. So is it the same thing? I just, kind of program myself to be happy all the time? Or how does that?
No, it's the exact opposite of that.
Oh, wow.
It is I understand why gratitude can be aligned with positive thinking, because when you are grateful, there is that sense of being more positive. But gratitude has necessarily a relationship with another person, so that you can't have gratitude without expressing that gratitude to someone else. So for me, it starts out with appreciation, but it doesn't become complete gratitude until it's an action of some kind where you're giving back to someone for what you have received. Whereas positive thinking can be very individualistic, and you can just think positively and replace one negative thought with a positive thought, but that's just like putting a positive veneer over a negative situation, and it can be quite destructive. So gratitude is really, really different to that. It's sort of like an acknowledgement and then an action. It's a very different kind of process. And plus, I talk about gratitude as a practice rather than a way of thinking.
So it's not that you just decide and you become more grateful and you start seeing things as a gift and all this. How do you practice that?
No, I think, well, it's just more that I think everybody has an element of gratitude in their lives. It's not like I'm coming along saying with this brand new thing, but it's about, as a practice, it's about choosing one thing that you would like to practice gratitude more towards, one person or one lecture or one textbook, for example, and really practicing with just that one thing for a period of time until it becomes a habit, and then moving on to the other thing. And as a result of really focusing on that one thing, the sort of circle of gratitude kind of, emulates from that.